Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and just as about this time last month, another Discworld review. I've covered the first 3 of these books over the last 3 months. That means that this month, August of 2026, is time for Mort by Terry Pratchett. Mort is generally considered one of the better starting points for the Discworld series, and many folk expected for this to be where the series definitely full-scale clicked for me, so today we discuss whether or not I agree with either of those assertions. Strap in, because it's time to talk about Mort. I think the best way to start off this video, and the way that I think I plan to start off any Discworld review in the future, is basically the question of, is this a good starting point for the series? Because, you know, there are very many different places that could be potential starting points, and many that are recommended. Mort is one of those very highly recommended starting points, and as far as that assertion goes that I just talked about a moment ago, yes, 100% Mort is undoubtedly a great place to start the series, and in many ways more so than even The Color of Magic is, as the first book in the series. So, yes, I would say that it is no wonder to me why this is such a frequently cited starting place for Discworld. So let's talk a little bit about why. We shall start off with the good, and boy howdy hey, is there a lot of good to talk about in Mort. I think the main thing that is notable to me about Mort, especially in comparison to Equal Rights, the previous book, is that the two sides of Pratchett's general humor proclivities and his style of writing about that are both really on point within Mort, especially early on in the first half of it. You know, the first one of those sides of Pratchett's humor basically being the more short form, random one-liners and whatnot, that kind of humor utilized a lot within the first couple of books in the series, and then this book utilizes a lot of it as well. The second side of his humor being the more long-form, sometimes even multi-page long jokes, and then the kinds of callbacks that also come from bits that recur throughout a book as well, and pay off into something a little bit more meaningful rather than just being solely a random bit that comes up now and again. That is also definitely on point in this book as well, and also formulated a little bit more intentionally than I think is the case in some of the previous books. I think that Equal Rights was a little bit harder for me to personally enjoy because it kind of falls back and doesn't really utilize humor anywhere near as much as, frankly, these other 3 books have all done. So it was a little bit harder for me to enjoy in that way, because I enjoyed the humor of the first couple of books, and I especially enjoyed the humor of the second book. I would say the humor of Mort is even better than it has been in any of the 3 previous books. The amount of times that I was, taking notes and annotations, I guess, highlighting different quotes and jokes and stuff in this book, even compared to something like Fantastic. I did it a lot in this book. I did it a lot more in this book. So, yeah, that's definitely something that is on point, is Pratchett's humor. There is a third side to Pratchett's humor as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that is definitely something that is worth experiencing within Mort, is if you're expecting the Discworld humor, you can read Mort, and if you don't really find it funny, you might just not really be into Discworld type of humor or Pratchett's type of humor. So it's a very easy way to actually gauge what that is like. But on the other side of things, it's not just the humor, it's not just the funny ha-ha moments. There's also still a seriousness that offsets the sheer wittiness at quite intentional intervals within Mort as well. I think that the dynamics of character interactions very much predominantly drive this. Ironically, even including Death. Death is a character who is, more or less inherently incapable of empathy, but has some of the most sympathetic moments in this book, and the irony that is intrinsic to that is really great. The irony of that is funny, but it is also, a more meaningful side of the series that is poking up a little bit more in this book than I think that it has previously, so that's definitely something worth noting. I think that the inherent ideas that are being explored here, like life and death, tampering with fate, these are all thematically very central to the story of Mort, and I think it's done so very successfully. And there are also, even the briefer, sharper points as well, kind of the same way that the humor has some of the short form humor and some of the longer form humor. Even the serious moments have some of this as well, because, like I said, the broader thematic stuff is a very central core pillar of the book. But there are also the briefer, sharper points where Pratchett does just remind you every once in a while that it's not just jokes. There's a serious topic to be had here. For example, when Mort and Death are exploring something in Ankh-Morpork, and Death detects that somebody just basically drowned their cats in a bag, basically, and killed them that way. That's also a moment that just kind of occurs, and it seems to come out of nowhere in an almost whiplashy way, but it also, like I said, it just reminds you of the reality of things. These books are satires, but being a satire doesn't mean that it has to be all funny ha-has. Satire can be serious as well, and depicting something like that, like Death being particularly fond of cats and that kind of thing being one of the only things that makes him genuinely angry, it's a serious moment that sticks out, and I think sticks out in just the right moments to really break up all of the humor, to remind you, like I said, that it's not just about the jokes. There's also serious stuff here, and it is well done, in my opinion. Another thing about Mort that I want to praise, and it was a similar thing that I talked about with regards to Equal Rights in particular, was that Equal Rights definitely focused a little bit more on plotting and character, and Mort does both of those things as well, and I think it does them better. So I would say predominantly the forefront plotting of the book is more organized and intentional here than in Equal Rights. So that's something that's definitely worth noting. I think that Equal Rights is more plot forward of a book, but it still felt more like a string of events just kind of going along. Mort has a plot that feels like it's more properly developed and fleshed out, like different pieces of it are informing other pieces of it, and there is some of the thematic through lines that are coming through a little bit more prominently, I suppose. There are plenty of those string of events moments within this book as well, but it feels a lot less random this time around. That's definitely something that I enjoyed a lot. Basically, you kind of know what's going on and what's being built towards the entire time, and that's something that you can't say for any of the 3 previous Discworld books, or at least that's not something I would say about the 3 previous Discworld books. But I also did mention characters and stuff. That's something that Equal Rights did as well. It has a couple proper main characters, but it doesn't really have much by way of characters or characterization outside of those 2 main characters, basically. In comparison, Mort features an even more deep characterization than any of the other books so far have, because Mort has a couple of those main characters, but it has a few major secondary characters as well, and those secondary characters are prominent throughout the whole story, and there are even a couple of character reveals that go along with them, and there are also some other tertiary and random characters that feel a little bit more part of the world this time around. And so you just feel like there's more meat on the bones of Mort than something like Equal Rights. That was another reason why I struggled to enjoy Equal Rights some of the time, was that it felt a little bit long-winded in that only really having those 2 main characters and not really having much besides that for the most part, at least until the climax, basically, and where one of the side characters became a little bit more prominent. But like outside of those 2 main characters, just feels like you're spending a lot of time just doing random things without a real strict purpose in mind. Like, you do kind of have a goal in there, but it doesn't feel like it has as much drive, and this book definitely feels like it has more drive based around some of the characters rather than something else. And the fact that there are more characters to flip things around with in there really helps. The core conceit of the book definitely works in this manner as well. Death hiring somebody to basically not take over his job, but basically hiring an apprentice, so to speak, and that being the conceit behind having some additional characters in there. I think it does really work out really well. So overall, the good of Mort comes down to it overall just being a culmination of all of the good ideas of the 3 previous books and utilizing a lot of those ideas even better. There's even the fact that for me personally, having read the 3 previous books meant that there were a couple things that I got a little bit more out of, such as one particular side character reveal, there being a couple of good cameos that feature in this book, especially near the end. You know, for my experience, I have to wonder if I would have clicked with this book as hard as I did without having read the 3 previous books, because it is a culmination of all those good ideas that I was already into to that extent. And again, combining all those together and doing them largely better. I would probably still really like this, but the build-up of everything in this was definitely huge, and the build-up of the series thus far has been huge, even though the books are largely unrelated. So, you know, that's the good of Mort. But now we're going to go into the bad. There are a couple points that I do want to talk about that I didn't necessarily struggle a ton with, but I would say that like the back half, the structure of the back half threw me off a little bit at times, if I'm being completely honest. Mostly this is notable with the third quarter of the book as opposed to the back half entire, but like the third quarter of the book, I wasn't struggling per se, but I was thrown off a little bit by the structure, because you have vignettes of death kind of doing various things that are cut in between a much more dramatic storyline with Mort's character. And again, the irony of the offset there is something that is entertaining and amusing, but also was a little bit harder to care quite as much about until it came back around near the very end, because it does thematically start to come in on itself and work out. Just means that there might be a couple points within the book, at least there were a couple points for me, where it started to feel more like strings of events where the plot itself felt like it was almost getting lost until it no longer felt that way. So that was just something a little bit for me. Like I said, obviously a lot of that stuff, it makes sense. There was just an aspect, I guess, to the maybe tonal whiplash, I guess you could say, the urgency versus the non-urgency aspect that felt a little strange for a small portion of the book. The other problem with the book, and this is a little bit more notable, especially for a book that's so short and that can be read basically so quickly, is that some of the problems of redundancy that frankly all 3 of the previous books have had so far is another problem yet again within this book. You know, redundancy, more particularly repetition in specifics with certain details, again, can just be a little bit, you know, wearisome. Like it's not super annoying. It doesn't really affect the quality of the book, but it is one of those things that's like, why are we using this description again? Why are we saying the same thing again? And it's not even just in the sense of like, oh, you've read this line in the 3 previous books. This is an internal problem, like the nature of sunlight on the disc, for example, is explained in this book at least 3, I think it's more like 4 times, with basically the exact same wording. And with 300 pages, and these pages being able to be read even by my very slow ass, being able to do that in like a minute and a half a page, that means that you're getting this spiel like once every 100 pages, basically. And that's too much for the same description to be occurring. It's a redundancy. It's a repetition there. That's just like, I know how the sun works on the disc. You explained this to me 50 pages ago, Terry. So, you know, it's a very minor thing, but it is one of those things that all of the Discworld books so far have kind of struggled with, is certain ideas, certain world building things being brought up multiple times, because I guess Terry just forgets what he has explained or not, because a lot of the jokes, a lot of the humor of the series works by utilizing punchlines forefront, you know, for obvious reasons, because punchlines, obviously. But it's worth noting that making a punchline means you kind of have to build up to it. You have to have context to it. And sometimes that means the same context for a few different jokes is being utilized. And again, Terry just forgets that some of it was explained multiple times already, and whoever edited the books just didn't bother to do anything about it. So that's a little bit more of a personal problem, but like I said, it's just a repetition thing. We don't need to repeat the same description for sunlight and explain how it works 3 times in the same book. Like, we get it once, we get it. You should just trust us to understand it, even if it's not like the biggest deal in the world. You know, I still really liked this book. And then one final thing as well, more of a technical point. I do think the cameos are cool in this book, but I think there was a big missed opportunity, because there were a couple cameos from a couple of the first 2 books, basically, that come out of this that are really cool. There was one particular character that definitely could have been included as a cameo from book 3, the main character, Esk. I think that Esk could have made a cameo at the end of this book as well, and would have also made really great fodder for a good joke the same way that one of the other cameos was fodder for a good joke in the same way. That I think was just a little bit of a missed opportunity personally. But yeah, that's really all I have to say. Like, these are just two very minor points basically. So we're going to move on into the ugly of Mort here, and just to say that I think the footnotes of this particular book are a little bit goofy, if I'm being completely honest. You know, there are a few footnotes maybe spread out between the first three books combined. There's not very many of them. I was vaguely aware that the series writ large contained many footnotes, even though the first few of them don't really contain them. For me, the ugly is mainly that the footnotes of this book, if they are indicative of how the footnotes are going to be throughout the series, like tonally, I just might not really enjoy the footnotes of the series. I don't know. Of course, like, we have to read more books before I'll know. But the footnotes of this book are definitely more of the third flavor of humor that Terry Pratchett goes into, where it's the straight-up absurdist humor, like stuff that starts to cross a line into, for me, being a little bit too much. You know, there are a couple of the footnotes in this book that go super hard, to be clear, but the real absurdist side of the humor comes through in the footnotes, where it's just like something extraordinarily random and also kind of messed up to a degree that's like, what in the world are you even thinking including this in here, whether it's a footnote or not? So I don't know. I guess the more straight, pure, absurdist humor of the footnotes didn't really click for me. So that's the ugly of it, being the fact that I'm not sure if that's a tone that's going to carry through in the future of the books, if they're going to feel continually very random and like, why are they even being included at this point type of thing, if they're going to bleed and go across the line into the type of humor that I no longer really find as funny as it is just kind of what the hell, you know? So if these are when Pratchett takes the opportunity to go overboard, it's basically fine, because I would prefer for that to be relegated to the footnotes instead of being, you know, contained throughout the entire narrative of any of these books. And I'm very aware this is a personal issue, but it's mostly just a hesitancy concern. I'm concerned that if the larger tonal footprint of the footnotes, pun not intended there, within Mort are indicative of how they're going to be in the rest of the series, I don't think I'm going to like the footnotes of the whole series. Yikes. But we'll see how that goes. The recommendation for Mort is that I absolutely recommend this book, regardless of if you've read the first three books or not, really, because if you have read the first three books, this is a combination and better version of everything that those books are doing well, without the things that it doesn't do well, basically. And if you want to try Discworld, but don't want to read those first three books first, you want to give this the starting place. Like I said at the beginning, this is the way to go, I think. You know, it's got the subtle and the explicit humor, the jokes, the punchlines, the satire, all of that is in here at its best. It's got some of the more random serious bits that break up the funnies that I talked about. The plotting is more forefront, and the distinct characters drive it throughout in ways that the first three books didn't necessarily do. The balance of all these elements is pretty on point, so I think you should try Mort. If you're curious about the series and you want to make this your starting point, I can't argue against that. As for my personal ranking of the series so far, it should come to no surprise that Mort is number one for me now. So my favorite book of Discworld so far is Mort, which I'm giving right now 4.5 out of 5. In second place is The Light Fantastic at 4 out of 5. In third place is Equal Rights at 3.5 out of 5. And in fourth place is The Color of Magic at 3 out of 5. With Equal Rights and Color of Magic kind of being interchangeable. I slightly prefer Color of Magic, even though Equal Rights is a better book, so you can think of those as like basically a tied position despite the rating difference. So that's what things look like at the moment. And with all of that, that means I am officially 10% of the way through the Discworld series, and I will be getting to 2 more of the books in the series this year over the next 2 months. Namely, Sorcery, the 5th book in the series, is going to be coming up in September. I will be reading that at the time of this video's release next week. And so I should be doing my review of that at the end of September, basically. And then I will be doing Weird Sisters at the time of October, basically, more of a Halloween-y type of read. So you can join along for either one or both of those if you wish over the next couple of months, just as I've been reading the series so far with a few friends, a couple of those who have been rereading it for the second or even third time. So yeah, it's been an adventure so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing. All that being said, for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.